translations will translate that verily, or even verily, verily, okay, from which we get our word verified, or verifiable, or veracity, all having to do with truth. So yes, Jesus as God is incapable of lying. We don't know why he began many of his statements this way. Particularly, he did not ever say why. He used this particular formula in speaking sometimes. He didn't do it every single time he opened his mouth. But, many, many, many times, of course, he would begin this way. I think, if anything, the reason would be something along the lines of what Arm suggested. He is the truth, but probably a little deeper than that. Remember that at the time of Christ, that false messiahs were a common thing. Okay? Even false messiahs named Jesus. We know that there were probably as many as a half a dozen people running around the first century in Judea by the name of Jesus, claiming to be either the Messiah or the forerunner for the Messiah. This would go on past the first century, even the next 100 years after that. This was a pretty common consideration. In other words, this proves that the Jews, the Jewish leaders, Jewish religious leaders, understood that there would be a Messiah. They understood his name would be Jesus, or some form of Jesus. So they cannot claim to be ignorant about the fact that the Messiah was here at that time. Now, some of these false messiahs, however, proclaimed all kinds of false teachings, predicted things that did not happen, and would not happen. I mean, some of them predicted things that were outlandish. And that could be the reason why Jesus very often says, I am telling you the truth. These other guys out there, they're not. These other characters out there, and even the other religious leaders, like the scribes and Pharisees and so on and so forth, the Sadducees, the priests, the Levites, he would say, they're not telling you the truth. I am telling you the truth. I am putting things in concrete fashion so that you will understand what is right and wrong. You will understand what is good and true. You will understand what is wicked and evil, and so on and so forth. I am setting forth before you the absolute truth. So that's probably why. But again, he never says, "Oh, I am saying verily, verily," because he never says that. But I think our surmise is as good as any. And certainly, as I say, as the Messiah, he's incapable of telling the truth, telling a false lie, a lie anyway. Okay, so anything else? Yes, here.
Did any of those false messiahs do a miracle as a result of the devil?
Not that we know of. I don't know. I can't say that because a lot of the records of those false messiahs have been lost. Some historians refer to them only by name, and that's about it. They don't necessarily say why they became popular or why people followed them. A lot of times they simply made promises. We will defeat the Romans for you. We will, or you join us, together we'll defeat the Romans. Together we'll push them out of our territory. We will then become our own bosses once again, and eventually we too will then rise, and our kingdom will be like David and Solomon's, and so on and so forth. Yes, ma'am.
Those false messiahs, for lack of a better term, were they anything like the televangelists we have today were they're in it for the money?
I don't think they were in it for the money necessarily. I think they were all pretty much would call themselves patriots. You know, they were all in it for following. They liked accolades. They liked big crowds following them. And they all were misguided in the sense that God's kingdom would be an earthly kingdom. Just like many false prophets today, or false preachers today, who think that God's kingdom is a material kingdom and think believers will not have any problems. They don't get sick, you know, they're never poor, they get all the blessings of the world and so on and so forth. And you know, the same type of people who think, well, you know, we are Americans are a chosen people. We're the chosen nation now, you know, and we got to win everything. We got to be top dog all the time, and you know, that's God's will and all that kind of stuff. Which is, yeah, it's the same kind of thing. I mean, for years, generations now. That's been a common theme among our. Now, I will say that if you spout that lie, you're likely to get rich. That's true. I don't know. I can't read hearts. I don't know if that's the motivation for a lot of these guys. But I know that they do get rich when you tell people something they like to hear. You know, like the United States of America is God's chosen nation in the world, that kind of stuff. People like that.
I was just wondering if the false ones in Jesus' time got rich the way they do now.
I don't know. Like I say, a lot of the history of those people have been lost. And all we have is comments about them. All we have is a few, you know, there was this guy, this Jesus guy who was leading this insurrection, and there was another Jesus fellow over here in this area who was leading that insurrection. I think we can assume that they did have a certain amount of power and prestige, I guess. We can assume that, I know in the example of Simon Bar Kokhba, who led a revolt against Rome in the 200s, I know that Simon, he plundered and looted cities and kept a lot of the spoil for himself. So I don't know if that answers the question or not. I think most of these people, it seemed to me anyway, from looking at it from a historical standpoint, most of them seem to be in it for patriotic reasons. They want to throw off the Romans, you know, more so than probably any area that Rome dealt with. You have the same thing up in the Rhine area, the German area, the resistance to Rome. You had a little bit the same thing in the Celtic area, you know, Scotland and such. And you had a little bit the same thing. But most countries that were conquered and occupied by Rome, they pretty much sucked it right in and just said, "Hey, that's fine. We don't mind being part of the empire." And they didn't revolt as much. But boy, Judea, the Jews constantly revolted. The barbarians, what's called the barbarians, the Huns up in the German area, and the Celts. Those three. And of the three, the Jews were the worst. No question about it. But again, it was more patriotism. It was more, we don't want to be ruled by anybody. We want our freedom. We want to rule ourselves. We want we don't want to have to do what other people tell us to do, you know, way far away in Rome. It was more than that, much more than that than and maybe they did get well off. You know, they probably lived a lot better than their soldiers. But I don't think that was the motivation.
You don't want somebody else ruling their people because they want to rule forward and have that power.
Yeah. It's always really, it's more about power than it's not anything else. Anything else you want to ask, discuss, consider? Yes, Mr. Bruce.
I'd like to discuss what's written behind you.
Which one?
The one with the underline.
Oh, yeah, well, that has to do with our topic today. Just something it's like Easter, you know. I don't like Easter. I don't like the term. I think it's a bad choice. But, you know, I'm never going to get my way. I know that. The church is never going to change, all right? Even though they should. But they're never going to. But anyway,
Could it be that the Jews were always fighting the Romans because they had to blame somebody for letting them kill Jesus?
I don't think so.
They never like to take blame.
No, they wouldn't, and they wouldn't because they would say he got what he deserved. So it wouldn't be a matter of blame as far as they're concerned. All right, let us move on then to our topic. You know, any time we can make hay while the sun shines, so to speak. Okay, so page 71 in the study, we have discussed the old religions of the old pagan, heathen religions of the world so far: Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism. And now we're to Christianity. We talked about the Apostolic Church. One thing you want to remember about the Apostolic Church, the Apostolic Church lasted for about 500 years, give or take a little, and until the 6th century, until the 500s, I would say middle to late 500s, the Apostolic Church was just that. It was a church made up of the teachings and ideas from Jesus and his apostles. There was not unanimity. There were certainly many doctrines that needed to be worked out during that period of time. But by 487, one of the main councils of Carthage, for example, things were pretty much settled. There you had, in the Council of Orange, you had the definition of Chalcedon that was written before and now accepted as a correct delineation of the second member of the Trinity. So by the mid 500s, the church had dealt with most of the problems, doctrinal problems, not all of them, but most of them, and had kind of come to a consensus. Also by the mid 500s, we had the Bible together now. The 39 books of the Old Testament are already accepted, of course. The 27 books of the New Testament now accepted and settled and closed. Okay, so it's closed. Everybody in the church at the time agrees. Question?
Laura has asked, most people will not understand Roman. Is it okay to say Roman Catholic?
Sure, I suppose. But I'm coming to that. I'm coming to that. I just want to set the scene. So by 550, 575, 580, somewhere around there, the church is pretty much settled, I would say, as far as its doctrinal controversy. Not, again, 100%, but pretty much settled. The Bible is finished, completed. It is being copied now. Not going to get in the hands of everybody for another 1,000 years. But you've got one at each parish, probably, maybe not each parish, but certainly at the bishop's residence, bishop's parish, you have a New Testament and Old Testament, maybe even put together. You have one of those, at least one. You've got one at the monasteries for use there. New Testaments are being copied separately, and a lot of people have those. Again, mostly kings, bishops, archbishops, cardinals, things like that, princes, dukes, people, royalty, and rich people are able to afford. These are all hand copied. Again, they're going to be hand copied until the 1400s. So again, about 1,000 years, people are going to be hand copied. They have entire buildings dedicated, scriptoriums they're called, and that's all those people do all day long, from first light to end light, and sometimes even at candlelight, depending on if there's a rush on it. Copying very clearly, very carefully each copy of the Bible by hand. And they're copying them on parchment paper, which is expensive, or vellum. Vellum is a kind of skin, a hide, that is pressed very flat and treated so that it becomes like a really, really thick paper. That is even more expensive. In many cases, every page of these manuscripts, of these very large Bibles, I mean, by the time you put 66 books of the Bible into a book, and some of the letters are pretty good size, you've got a very large book. Sometimes each page is decorated with animals and other flowers and things like that. You've probably seen pictures of the Book of Kells, for example, that's been done in Ireland. That's a good example, but just one example of a lot of the Bibles that were done during this 1,000-year period of time. Okay? So the church was, for the most part, at peace in the sense of having doctrine settled. Their infrastructure, their organizational model was pretty much settled. The empire, of course, the Roman Empire had collapsed by that time. The Western Empire of Rome falls in 476. AD 476, Rome falls. That's the Western Empire. The Eastern Empire does not fall until 1453. Constantinople, so 1,000 years later. This means that the Church of Rome is the last really bastion of organization. It is a place you look to for direction, for guidance, because there is no more emperor anymore after 476. The legions disband. Imagine the national government. No hip parades, please. But imagine the national government completely collapsing, which means the postal system collapses. The armed forces collapse. You don't have any armed forces anymore. You don't have the postal system anymore. You don't have any. You have no national network of anything. Right? Your connection, let's say our connection with Washington is completely cut, and even the connections with the regional governments are completely cut. So our relationship with Tucson and Phoenix is completely cut. We have no relationship with them whatsoever anymore. We are on our own, 100%. We have to defend ourselves. If the Mexican army comes across the border, we have to defend ourselves. We can't count on anybody else. If our water system goes bad, we got to go someplace and get water. We can't count on anybody else helping us. Can't count on the Central Arizona Project. If our food goes down, we got to start going down there in the San Pedro River Valley and planting our own food. Okay, that's what I'm talking about, folks. When Rome fell, you don't understand. It affected everyone. Okay, and all of the thing that they had known for 1,000 years was gone, just gone. And barbarians were sweeping in, and there was no law. I mean, they could take whatever they wanted. They could kill whoever they wanted. They ransacked churches because they were not Christians yet. They would be eventually, but they're not yet. And so all of society, when you hear these doomsday people talk about anarchy, and they talk about the zombie apocalypse or whatever, that's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about every man for themselves, literally. And if you had a little bit of property, and maybe you had a little bit of money, maybe you were a former Roman magistrate or whatever, you had a few shekels more than the next guy, maybe you could pay some people to defend you, maybe you could pay some people to build you a castle, all right? Or maybe you could agree with people, hey, you build my castle, I'll let you have a little bit of land here, you can grow your thing. And so the serf system, or the S-E-R-F, the serf system, the peasant system, started to come about slowly. It took a while for that to come to fruition, about 500 years, but it was starting to come. And so all of society is being remade from the ground up. Okay? And the church is the only stable institution. Okay? The priests are the only people who can read and write at this time, and even a lot of them don't, but the bishop probably can. But got to be the royalty, in other words, those former Roman magistrates with a little bit of money, okay, they get to be the dukes and earls and the princes and that kind of stuff. The kings of the area who were kind of part-time kings, now they became full-time kings, and they would name judges, and the judges would go out and try to keep the peace and stuff, and sheriffs, okay, like Sheriff of Nottingham, all right, that kind of thing, would be in charge of certain areas, and so on and so forth. So you have to rebuild society from nothing, from zero. You got to rebuild it. You got to start, doing everything over again that the Roman Empire had done for you. So at that time, the church then becomes the key player in everything. It becomes the number one thing in everyone's life. And you've got to have a place to go. And of course, the church, of course, is making itself essential to also by saying, we are the only way to salvation. We are the only way to heaven. We are the only way that this life has become pretty miserable, and it did. I mean, if you were going to graph, everyday life and a happiness quotient or whatever, or contentment or whatever, you would say, okay, during the 200s, 300s, 400s, it was about level. Everything was going fine. Maybe it started to go down a little bit in the 400s. But when Rome fell and the last emperor was deposed and the barbarians took over, okay, the quality of life is way down here for 99% of the folks. Quality of life. Right? We think that last year the plague was bad. You ain't seen nothing yet, folks. Okay, as much as you may dislike the national government or even the state government, we have to realize that that's how we're organized, and if that goes away, then we have to start over, and we have to organize ourselves over again. And at that point, the old adage becomes very, very true, right? It's the golden rule. Them with the gold rule, okay? And it's also the power of the strongest. Okay? And if you've got more ammo than the next guy, you're topped off. Okay? If you've got more shooting irons than anybody else, and you've got more ammo than anybody else, guess what? You become the boss. It's real simple. It's real easy. Okay? And maybe you and the guy with the gold make a nice little partnership, huh? Right? You protect him, he helps you. Okay? And you start buying up all the bankrupt properties around you, and start buying up all the bankrupt businesses around you with his gold, and he uses you for protection, and pretty much, guess what? You get to be your own country. Yeah, that's how it works, folks. Right? That's how it works. So, as much as I don't like Washington any more than you do, but a peaceful transition would be much preferable to me. I don't know about you. I'm not the best shot in the world. So I would prefer a peaceful transition. Because otherwise I'd go in the first wave. So anyway, so Rome is it, all right? And so the reason I say today, the reason that they use the word Catholic simply means worldwide, okay? And that's what the word means. It means worldwide. And in that way, it's true. But they see it in another way. They use the term universal. So to a Roman Christian, okay, it is this. They are universal, which is the same thing as saying only. Okay? It is still a doctrine of the Roman Church that they are the only true church. All other churches on the face of the earth are false churches, are wrong churches, are not true Christian churches at all. Everybody is a member of their church, whether they know it or not. Okay? So when they say the word Catholic, they mean universal, which is not the meaning of the word. That is not the meaning of the word. The word simply means worldwide, which is true. But it's not universal. So you have to understand, when they use the term Catholic, they're saying to the world, and they're saying to you, we are it. We are the only church that is a true Christian church. All other churches are false churches. Okay? So I prefer that we call them what they are. Roman. Okay? They are not universal. That is incorrect. Okay? But we shouldn't call them that. We shouldn't give them the privilege of claiming that title. And as far as this word goes, actually, worldwide and universal is the holy Christian church, the communion of saints. That is both worldwide and universal. And so small c, that's what we are. We are Catholic. They are not. They are Roman. So I would wish that Christians, Protestants especially, would stop using this term and switch to this term. Happy?
Well, you answered my question. I was going to ask if couldn't we say that we are more
Absolutely. No, we are
you answered it.
we are 100% more Catholic than they are. By far. And you will see this by the time we get done with these 30 pages. You will agree with me 100%. They are not, by any stretch of the imagination, small c Catholic. Not even close. And you could make the argument they're not even Christian. So I refuse, when I think about it, because I'm conditioned just like you are, okay, but I refuse to allow them that privilege. They are Roman, not Catholic. And I would not even say Roman Catholic. Just use Roman and stick to it. If our church headquarters, Missouri's church headquarters, and all of its ministers, and all of its people, and let's say 4 or 5 other Protestant denominations, all stopped using the term Catholic and started using the term Roman eventually. But I don't think that's how it is. Because people are lazy. People are lazy and they're not going to change. Just like with Easter, they're not going to change. They like what they like. It doesn't matter history. It doesn't matter facts. Don't confuse me with the facts. I like what I like. Yeah. Okay? All right. So that's the introduction. That's kind of where we're at. We're 1580, 1590. Church is kind of at peace in many ways. The world, however, is a mess. It's an anarchy mess. And the church is kind of holding Western Europe and Western society together. Not for the Roman Church, frankly. All the bad things I say about it, and I'm going to say about it, without the Roman Church, we would probably not have Western civilization. That's also a fact. So the truth is messy. It doesn't just go one direction. It's not just one thing. Truth includes a whole lot of things that work together. All right, let's begin. Page 71. The Roman Church, also known as the Catholic Sick Church. Sick means it's a misnomer. It's not a correct use of the term. So I'm going to start with Pope Gregory I. See, he is what I call the first true pope. And really the one who, if you want to say, you can even say kind of invented the modern Roman Church. Up to Gregory, the popes, some of them were a problem. There were some false doctrines already being spoken around. But Pope Gregory really made the difference. I mean, he is really the watershed moment in the history of the church. After Pope Gregory, the Roman Church is going downhill fast. Really fast. Before Pope Gregory, the Roman Church is a Christian church, and it's for the most part, pretty pretty straight. And after Gregory, all bets are off. Right? Only two popes are traditionally referred to as the Great. Leo the Great, 440 to 461, and Gregory the First. So Leo the First and Gregory the First are called the Great, and nobody else among 200 some odd popes over the years. They're the only ones. Pope Leo is called the Great because anybody? Look at his dates. Right before the fall of Rome. So the Huns, the barbarians of various kinds, are at Rome's gates over and over and over again. And Leo has the historical distinction. You want to make a little note someplace in that margin up there? He is the one who saves Rome from Attila. Yeah, Attila the Hun, that guy. Famous guy. Yeah? Yeah. Leo I saves the city of Rome from Attila the Hun. He marches, Attila's army has come upon the gates of Rome, surrounded the city. The Roman defenders are pretty much exhausted. They can't take much more. There's no Roman legion to save them. There's nobody between Attila and his barbarous hordes and the city of Rome to be raped, pillaged, and burned to the ground. And Pope Leo I walks out of the city gates in front of Attila and his massive horde. Just him, just himself, nobody else, just Leo. He walks out there and he has a pardon with Attila, and he makes a deal with him. He says basically, hey, Attila, don't be destroying everything. Hey, don't be burned, right? Tell you what, you go in, we'll give you a nice party. Free booze, all the women you could possibly use, good food, we'll take good care of you. We'll take good care of you and your men. They'll have a fun. Whiskey for your men and beer for your horses. Right, basically. That's basically what Leo said. And Attila says, you know what, we're tired of fighting too, and we don't want to lose any more guys. And so, yeah, okay, fine. And so Attila goes in, and he has parties in Rome for a couple weeks, I think. And yeah, they do burn a few buildings, and they do steal a few things, and they wreck a few things. But in general, they don't pillage the entire town and leave it flat. And then they leave. And after they leave, everybody says, hey, Leo, such a deal you made. All right. And ever since then, Leo's known as the Great. Because he made a deal they couldn't refuse. All right.
Can I ask one?
Yeah.
What was it like when Pope Fabian, 250 AD?
He was a pretty good guy. Yeah. But he wasn't a pope in the sense we think of today. He was just the bishop of Rome. Okay. And he was considered equal with the bishops of Constantinople, Jerusalem, Carthage, and Alexandria, Damascus, and those kind of places.
So he wasn't a real pope?
Not really. No. Gregory's the first, who's a real. We would reckon if Gregory stepped on TV today and spoke today, we would recognize him as a popey guy. He would be a popey guy. Most of the folks before him, we would say, what's this guy? What's this guy? I mean, what? Cardinal of Chicago. Yeah. That's about it. All right. He was pope from September 3rd, 590 until his death on March 12th, 604. He's also known as Gregory Dialogus, the dialogist in Eastern Orthodoxy because of the dialogues he wrote. He was the first of the popes from a monastic background. So here you have a hint of the change that's going to take place. All the other popes were either politicians or priests. Okay? And they were elected pope based on who knows what kind of things. But Gregory was a monk. Okay? And so he comes from a cloistered background. Cloister means you're ensconced. Think of it as an incubator. Okay? You're not out there in the everyday world, although he did a lot of traveling. He was a Renaissance guy long before the Renaissance. but still, spiritually, okay, he was a cloister guy. He was a guy from a monastery. That is important. Okay? Gregory is considered a doctor of the church and one of the four great Latin fathers of the church, the others being Ambrose, Augustine, and Jerome. Of all popes, Gregory I had the most influence on the medieval church. That is important. Underline that. He, as a matter of fact, I would say that of all the popes to this very day, he has to be ranked number one as far as influence. John the 23rd is the top five. Pius the 12th, probably in the top five. There's a couple others too, but probably Leo the 10th would be up there. But Gregory the First, as far as his long-reaching influence, the things that he decided, the things that he decreed, are still being done and practiced in the Roman Church today. So he really made a big difference, huge difference. Okay? The exact date of Gregory's birth is unknown, but is usually estimated to be sometime in the year 540. He was born into a wealthy, noble Roman family at a time when the city of Rome was facing a serious decline in population, wealth, and influence. By 540, of course, the emperor of Rome is gone. There is no more empire. The legions are gone. Rome is just a city like everybody else. And by this time, it's lost more than half of its population. And it's thought of, at this point, in the 500s, it's thought of as a backwater. Nobody goes to Rome anymore. Most of its massive buildings are torn down. The Colosseum is in disrepair. The circus is in disrepair. The place looks like a mess. It just looks like a mess. It's a dirty city. It's disheveled. It's just nobody in the 500s would say, see Rome and die. They would say, I'd rather die than see Rome. Okay? Because Rome was nothing. If you wanted to go to a great place, if you wanted, for a good time, go to Constantinople. Yeah, for a good time, go to Constantinople. Or Alexandria in Egypt. Or even Carthage. But Rome, who goes to Rome? Nobody goes to Rome. It's a dump. Really, at this time, it's a dump. His great-great-grandfather had been Pope Felix III. Gregory's father, Gordianus, worked for the Roman Church, and his three aunts were nuns. Young Gregory took an active part in Roman political life, and at one point was prefect of the city. However, after his father's death, he converted his family home, located on a hill just opposite the Circus Maximus, into a monastery dedicated to the Apostle St. Andrew. Gregory himself entered the new monastery as a monk. So if you have a little money and you're bored, you don't have anything else to do, make your home a monastery. And you become the first monk and the abbot, obviously. Eventually, Pope Pelagius II ordained him as a deacon, and in 579 sent Gregory as his personal ambassador to the imperial court of Constantinople. Ah, boy, there you go. I mean, this was a peach of assignment, right? This was like, let's say, give me an example. This was like, this really made him as a person. Think about back in the 30s when Roosevelt sent Joe Kennedy as ambassador to Britain, the Court of St. James. That's what it's called, the Court of St. James. So if you get to be the ambassador to Britain, you are really there. Okay? If you contributed to somebody's campaign and they make you the ambassador to Outer Mongolia, well, you didn't give enough money. Okay, right. If you were made the ambassador to Kazakhstan, you did something wrong. You ticked the guy off, right? You make the ambassador to Somaliland, and you insulted the guy's mother or something. Right? But if you get sent in the 30s, if you get sent to London, whoa! Your family is made it. You are now not just an Irish Catholic rum runner from Boston, a gangster. You are now in with the good crowd. Okay? You done. You made it. And of course, you know what happened after that. Kennedys have not been out of the spotlight since. So you get sent as ambassador of the Pope, or the city of Rome anyway, to the Church of Rome, to Constantinople, to the Eastern Church. That's top down. You can't get any better than that. Okay, so Gregory's star has risen. It's not going to go anywhere but up. And from there, he's got nowhere to go but up. On his return to Rome, 11 years later, note that he spends 11 years in the East. Now, why is that important? Because the Eastern Church has not changed one iota from its early apostolic beginning. And also, what the change there has been a liturgical and worship change to be very, very formal, to be very, very extensive liturgically. This is important. Now, it's not that there weren't Western Roman churches in Constantinople where he could worship. He could. But he was also influenced by the religion around him, which was Eastern Orthodoxy. Gregory acted as first secretary of Pelagius and then was elected pope to succeed him. So his resume, by the time Pelagius died and needed to be replaced, here's a guy, spent 11 years as ambassador, started his own monastery, probably speaks all a bunch of languages, right? Can deal with the barbarians, can deal with the East, can deal with, the Arabs and stuff, can deal with all kinds of people, and was secretary to the popes and knows all the secrets, right? Knows all things, how it's done and everything. And so, he was a shoo-in. He was a shoo-in. He was going to be the next pope. No big deal. That's when the fun begins, folks. Now the fun really begins. Paragraph 3. When Gregory became pope in 590, one of his first acts were writing a series of letters disavowing any ambition to the throne of Peter and praising and contemplative life of the monks. So first thing he does is defend himself against the charge that he's a climber. And from all that we can see, he was not. He was not a climber. He took the job because he thought he had to. He had a duty to do so. At that time, the Roman papacy had not yet exerted effective leadership in the Western Church. For example, the church in Gaul, i.e. France, when you hear Gaul, think France, was controlled largely by great territorial families and separate and independent episcopate of Gregory of Tours being typical. Tours is just south of Paris, okay, 50 miles maybe, 60 miles south of Paris. Battle of Tours, you may remember. Anybody remember Battle of Tours? Battle of Tours. Anybody? Battle of Tours was Martin of Tours, the Hammer, right? Defeated the Muslims, turned them back. Otherwise, we'd all be speaking Arabic. The Visigothic Spain, Visigoths that are all, here's a little secret for you. When people want to confuse you by talking about Visigoths and Ostrogoths, just remember, Visigoth simply means Western Goths. That's all it means. Anything else. And Ostrogoth simply means Eastern Goths. Remember that. Visigoths is Western Goths. Ostrogoths is Eastern Goths. Oster, by the way, is also where we get the word Eastern, because the sun rises in the east. Okay, so Visigothic Spain, that is the Goths, and the Goths were a branch of the Huns, okay, and they branched off and they went west, and eventually, they invaded France, Gaul, and then went through Gaul, and decided they liked Spain real well. So they settled in Spain. Well, also mostly because they ran into the Atlantic Ocean. So they stopped. Real simple. Had little contact with Rome. So imagine this. Imagine the Spanish church, before Gregory, the Spanish church not being Roman. It wasn't. The Spanish church, think about Spain, conquers the Western hemisphere. Imagine that they don't, it's not Roman that they spread. Now, of course it was by the time they get to that point, but at this point, if the conquest of the Americas had happened in the 500s instead of the 1500s, then Romanism, Spanish would still be their language, but it'd be a different kind of Spanish, by the way. It'd be more like Basque. But the Roman Church would not be the major church in the American hemisphere. Imagine that. Okay, so even in Italy, the papacy was beset by violent Lombard dukes. Lombard, when you hear the word Lombard, think northern Italy. Okay, along the border with France and Switzerland. Okay, if I had a map here, I'd show you. That's Lombard or Lombardy. And the Jews of Ravenna, again, northern Italian city. Ravenna in the south. The great scholarship and culture of Celtic Christianity had developed utterly and completely unconnected with Rome. And it was from Ireland and Britain that Germany were to become Christianized in the beginning. The Germans were not Roman Christians in the beginning. They were not converted by Rome. They were converted by the Celts. The church started by St. Patrick and St. Columba. St. Patrick and St. Columba in Scotland were the heads of the Celtic Church. And the Celtic Church was a much more missionary church than the Romans at this time. And the Celtic Church branched out all over the world, the known world, and sent missionaries down into France, sent missionaries to Germany, sent missionaries to the Scandinavian countries, sent missionaries over to Denmark and places like that. It was the Celtic Church that Christianized Northern Europe. Remember that always. Not the Romans. The Romans took over from the Celtic Church and destroyed the Celtic Church. Okay? St. Patrick was not a Roman. He was not a Roman Catholic. Not by any stretch of the imagination. He was the exact opposite. Patrick would not have agreed with most, if not the vast majority of Roman doctrines today. So again, Patrick is not a Roman Catholic. Patrick is a Celtic Christian. And the Celtic Church was much more apostolic and much more straight, much more, we would call it, in the Lutheran Church, we would call them confession. They did not have a lot of false doctrines. But they again were beaten up and destroyed by the Roman Church. Let's see, where was Still, Gregory asserted the primacy of the office of the Bishop of Rome, although he did not employ the term Pope. So Gregory never used the title. He summed up the responsibilities of the papacy in his official appellation as servant of the servants of God. And St. Benedict had justified the absolute authority of the abbot over the souls in his charge. Now, St. Benedict, first guy who put together a rule or a list of guidelines for a monastery. Okay? If you were a Benedictine, you followed St. Benedict's monastic rule. There was St. Benedict's rule and St. Bernard's rule. Eventually, St. Benedict won out, and St. Bernard's rule was not followed by most monasteries. Most monasteries followed St. Benedict. And one of the things St. Benedict said is the abbot, and you know, the word abbot simply means father, okay, Abba Father, okay? So the abbot, or the head of the monastery, has absolute control over the physical and spiritual lives of everybody in the monastery. The buck stops at his desk. Alright, so the Pope was saying, or Gregory was saying, I see my job as the same as the abbot's job. And again, why? Because he founded his own monastery, folks. And so he would think that way. He's not going to think like a parish priest because he never was one. He's going to think like a abbot of a monastery because that's what he was. And so he said, well, I just see my job running the church as the same thing. I have absolute control over the bodies and souls of every single Roman Christian. That's the way he saw it. It wasn't a grab for power. It was simply recognizing what he thought was true. Right? Thus he gained for himself many of the powers we see today in the papacy. In this way, he is seen by many as the first true pope in the modern sense of the word. So that's what he is. He's the first true pope. All the popes before him were fly-by-night, seat-of-the-pants guys. All the popes after him followed in his footsteps. Paragraph 4. Well, I'll stop there. Question so far. All right. I hope you're getting a sense. Of there's a big sea change happening here. Okay? The world is about to change tremendously. The world that Gregory was born into is about to die. It's about to pass away, never to be seen again. And he himself, one man, one human being, is about ready to create a completely new world. One guy. You don't get much more powerful. Few human beings on the face of the planet in time of history can claim such a feat. He is one. Paragraph 4. Gregory's pontificate saw the development of a number of what would become uniquely Roman Catholic doctrines and practices. Among them, now note these, okay? The act of private penance as parallel to, or even superior to, public confession and absolution. Yes, question?
Laura has asked, were they called saint before dying? I thought just those who were dead were considered saints.
Nobody was called a saint before they were dead. At least not at this point in history. No. And in many cases, many of them were not called saint until many years after their death. A few, like Leo, were granted sainthood almost immediately. There were a few others too. But guys like Gregory, I don't know when Gregory was sainted. I'd have to look that up. Yes, sir.
So St. Patrick wasn't called St. Patrick, it was
No.
later on.
No.
When
He
the
wasn't
Roman
even,
Church-
the fact of the matter was, he wasn't even called Patrick. Yeah. I mean, to be honest with you, if you said 10 years after he died, if you said we're going to honor St. Patty on the day he died, that's what we do, by the way. March 17th was his death day. All saints are celebrated on their death day except for one. Anybody know? All saints in the Christian calendar are celebrated on the day they died, except for one.
What about that lady in Rome?
Nope.
Mary?
Nope. John the Baptist. He is the only saint who is celebrated on the day he was born, not the day he died. Okay? Question? Yes.
If not question, Laura is saying you have Saint Benedict in the document.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, well, he is dead already, long before Gregory gets around. Yeah, he's dead. Let's see, where was I? Okay, private penance. Okay, so Gregory says public confession is not a big deal. Okay, I got to kind of agree with him on that a little bit. He would say, anybody could do that. You're standing in a group and you're saying, oh yeah, I'm a bad guy. And then the priest comes out and says, you're forgiven. Okay, because it applies to everybody. But Gregory, again, from the monastery idea, he's saying, no, you really want to get that forgiveness, really ensconced. You need to be eyeball to eyeball with somebody. You need to be sitting with them and you need to look them right in the eye and say, I, did X, Y, Z, whatever. And then the guy can come back at you and say, you're forgiven. Huh? See? I gotta agree with him. He's got a point. But what did that do? That made private confession the thing to do in the church. And public confession was totally pushed aside. Yes, ma'am?
It was eyeball to eyeball. When did they start with the booths where
The booths did not start till the 1500s. The booths, guys, get this, write this down someplace. Confessional booths in the Roman Church did not start till after the Reformation. Yes. Not till after the Reformation. And it was only in Italy for hundreds of years. It didn't come to the rest of the Roman Church until at least 200 years later. Yeah. Yeah. If you look at the really, really old churches in Italy and in Germany and in France, you can tell architecturally that the booths are add-ons. They're much younger than the rest of the old building around them. Much younger. No, you used to sit or stand eyeball to eyeball. The priest would be in the chancel area. Okay, that's the area from the communion rail, which in those days had what's called a rood screen. I'll get to that later on. But from the communion rail to the altar, that's the chancel. The priest would stand or sit in the chancel. You would come up through the steps like you were going to take communion, and there you would do confession. They still do it that way in the Norwegian church, by the way. The Norwegian Lutheran Church, ELS, they still do it that way. You know that in ELS, you come up to the communion rail twice. And you have communion in every service, just like ours, but you go up to the communion rail for confession. You don't have a general confession. You come up to the communion rail for confession. One at a time. Okay? Or, well, you stand a few feet apart, but you come to, and you say something, I forget what it is, it's in their liturgical book. You say something to the pastor, and then he goes to the next guy. And then to the next guy. And then the next person, and the next person, the next person, and the next group of people come up and do the same thing. And you do that for everybody there. And then you go back and start the church service with the Doric Patri and whatever. Okay? Then when it comes to communion, same thing. Come up and the pastor communion course. Now, that's the way it was done way back when. I mean, we're talking long ago, right? So in the Roman Church, long before the boxes, right? Long before the little cubicles, long before that, it was just you and the minister, eyeball to eyeball, along with everybody else. And it was a long line, and you go up and do your thing and whatever. And
So everybody heard your confession?
You're not supposed to listen in.
Yeah, right.
Social distancing.
Yeah, social distancing. Yeah. Spiritual distancing.
Yeah.
Okay, a clearly defined doctrine of purgatory. Now, I'm working on a paper on purgatory, and I can tell you that purgatory is a development. Right? It didn't reach its full thinking, if you will, or full explanation until Gregory's time. But a concept of purgatory I also found is in every religion in the world. Yep. They don't call it that, obviously, but every religion in the world has a version of purgatory. Yep. Found that out.
We?
No. Every false religion, excuse me. Let's see, indulgences. This was another invention of Gregory's that becomes famous 1,000 years later. In which the soul destined to undergo intense purification in purgatory after death because of certain sins could begin its purification in this early life through good works, obedience, and Christian conduct, and, of course, later on, donations to the church, thus making the travails to come lighter and shorter. Gregory is one of those who basically said, purgatory is no good. It's no good to teach purgatory if you don't teach it as worse than hell. It needs to be worse than hell as an incentive for people to get out of it. Okay? Otherwise, what's the point? If it's just a waiting area, grab a magazine and, wait your way through it, right? Grab your smartphone and play solitaire for the next 2 billion years. But no.
Well, that's all about this.
Well, it got to be all about that.
And that's one of the judges.
Number 5, or paragraph 5. Maybe 2 more. Most consequently for Western civilization, Gregory undertook the incorporation of the already Christian Anglo-Saxon kingdoms into the Roman Church. So those Anglo-Saxon kingdoms that were Celtic Christians, he wanted to bring them under the umbrella of Rome, the Church of Rome. Celtic missionaries had already been active in Scotland and throughout Lower Britain since the departure of the Roman legions in the mid-400s. But Gregory sent Augustine of Canterbury to convert the kingdom of Kent to Romanism. So understand what's going on here. These people in Kent, which is eastern Britain, they are, I think it's something. Anyway, they are Christians. They're Christians. They believe in the Trinity. They believe in 2 natures of Christ. They believe everything St. Patrick said. And you look at St. Patrick's breastplate online, find it online, or St. Patrick's Confession, you can find it online, and you'll see he is, for all intents and purposes, he's a Lutheran. Really. To be honest about it. Right? But the point is, he's a Christian. You don't need to be converted, hey. But that's not the way Gregory thought. Gregory assumed if you weren't taking orders from me, if you weren't under my control as the Bishop of Rome, you are suspect. You need to promise faithfulness to me. Otherwise, I don't trust that you are a Christian. So he sent Anselm there to convert the Celtic Christians to Roman Christians. Yeah. This, folks, is called sheep stealing. That's what this is called. And it is wrong. It is bad. The Celtic Church didn't do anything to Gregory. But he didn't see it that way. This was precipitated by the marriage of the Saxon king to a Merovingian. I always have trouble. Merovingian. Thank you. Merovingian simply means this was from the name escapes me. Merovingian from Charlemagne. From Charlemagne's kingdom. Okay, Charlemagne the Great. Okay, which just means Charles the Great. Anyway, Charlemagne and his ancestor or his descendants are called Merovingian, and there's a long reason for it. I'm not going to go into it very well. The Merovingian was, of course, a Roman Christian because they're in Gaul, and Gaul is run by the Roman Church. The Saxon was a Celtic Christian. Okay? Now, notice the guy, the king. Let's see, where is I? Yeah, the guy is an Anglo-Saxon. The woman is Roman. Well, guess who converted who? You see this, by the way, you see this happening in history all the time. This is a common thing, right? The Roman girl, or as my wife would say, the Catholic girl, okay, always converts the poor prostitute. 99 times out of 100. Remember Father Troutman saying to me when we went to see him about getting married, and I told him she's moving over to be Lutheran. And he said, "Are you going to be a pastor?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Just remember, you can't marry all your converts."
So you can't be a Mormon.
And she, of course, again, you've got to remember, in those days, women, the princesses, always relocated en masse to their husband's place, wherever it was. Okay, that's the way it was. It's just the way it was done. So, but because she was moving, she was allowed to bring with her anyone and anything she wanted. So if she had a special horse, whatever, bring the horse, her nursemaids, or, that kind of stuff, and those, her chaplains, yeah. And these guys were really gung-ho on converting these Celts over to Roman Christianity. By the time of Gregory's death, the conversion of Anglo-Saxon kingdoms to the Roman Church was well on. Sadly, it would be a very harsh and unnecessarily brutal incorporation. This would have long and far-reaching consequences for all of the West, right down to Italy. Suffice it to say, folks, and we'll stop there, suffice it to say that if the Celtic Church had been left alone by the Romans, if the Celtic Church had been left alone by the Romans, and if the Celtic Church continued its hold sway over Northern Europe, which means Normandy, Great Britain, Ireland, and maybe even the Scandinavian countries, you would not have the troubles in Ireland that you have today between the Protestants and the Catholics. So talk about far-reaching. This is why I call Gregory so important. The things he started in 600 have repercussions that go all the way to today. So that's why this stuff is important, folks. It's very important. What was Patrick's name? Patricius. He was Latin, but he was a Celtic Latin. He was a Roman citizen. He was a citizen of Rome. He lived before the Roman Empire fell. His father was a magistrate, a judge. And you have two different stories of his upbringing. One of them, he was a spoiled, rotten brat, and pretty much deserved what he got. And the other one was he was a pretty good kid, but got captured by Irish raiders. And Ireland was pagan at that time. I guess I didn't tell you the story of Patrick, this year when it came to St. Patrick's Day. I'll have a point. There's a point in here someplace. I'll be able to phone. Anything else? Questions, comments? As you can see, we are going to be studying Rome for months. Yeah. So get used to it. All right, let's close. May the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God the Father, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be and abide with us all.
Well, at least we'll know